Erev Tov, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another facet of the Temple Israel Adult Education Diamond, known as TIU, Temple Israel University. For the past 17 months, since the onset of COVID, under this TIU banner, we've offered over 100 sessions online, reaching, teaching, connecting thousands of adult learners, hopefully providing edification, inspiration, intellectual stimulation, and Jewish wisdom. Before two of Temple's four current rabbis share a rabbinic response to the epidemic of anti-Semitism, what's different and what's the same, one from the perspective of a rabbi close to 60 years old, I'm not there yet, but I'm in my late 50s, and another of your Temple rabbis closer to age 30. I intentionally wanted our other rabbi I'm about to formally introduce because this is a milestone of sorts. Because until the official start of the rabbinic tenure of Rabbi Jeff Dreyfus at Temple 2 weeks ago, yours truly has been the overseer of all our adult learning since May 2020. Rabbi Dreyfus is now co-leader with me in this realm, but he would be the first to say that it's not about him or me or Rabbi Simons, Rabbi Wollner. It's not about our cantorial soloist who teaches, Happy Hoffman. It's not about our emeriti or our fantastic lay teachers, some of whom I see on the screen, whether Hebrew or English. The beauty of Temple is that no matter who is leading or teaching, part of the greater mission of Temple is to continue being a center of lifelong Jewish learning. And I just have to say, despite the darkness of COVID, in my 30 years as a rabbi, we have never had more adult learners than we did in 2020, 2021. 60 born Jews and future Jews by choice alone recently completed our semester-long course entitled Exploring Judaism. Tonight is a one-off elective, you might say, using the college lingo, but please check out on timemphis.org. Rabbi Simons is going to be teaching a week from Friday about the first female rabbi. No, she's not from America. It was in Germany. You can go online, come to Torah study, adult Hebrew. This isn't an infomercial. This is really a celebration tonight, welcoming our newest rabbi, a thoughtful and gifted educator, an innovator who I know will lead us out of COVID and into the multi-access, virtual, and in-person hybrid approach to learning as the new year unfolds in just a few months. I've invited Rabbi Dreyfus to go first, but he's opted to go after me on our subject. Here's what we'll do. We will both share our presentations. I know many of you are watching on Facebook. We're going to leave you at 8 o'clock and have an interactive session with those of you on Zoom. So that's how we're going to do it. Let me begin my presentation in 3 parts by saying that more than half of American Jews, according to a very recent survey released by the Anti-Defamation League, more than half of American Jews said they encountered anti-Semitism following the start of last month's violence in Israel and Gaza. It was just last month. We're still in June. The survey also found that about 40% of American Jews said that they were more concerned about their personal safety in the aftermath of the violence between Israel and Hamas, and because of a rise of anti-Semitic incidents in the United States. At times of unrest or violence between Israel and, in this case, an armed terrorist group, we've historically seen a spike in anti-Semitic incidents, but this year the surge has been particularly dramatic and violent according to the head of the ADL, Jonathan Greenblatt. He said, the anti-Semitic incidents we've witnessed in the streets and on social media are weighing heavily on the American Jewish community. When incidents, by the way, that include explicit references to Israel or Zionism are excluded, the numbers still increased by 15% in May 2021 compared to May 2020. Many of these incidents, just so we're all on the same page, have been highly visible, including a brick thrown through the window of a kosher pizza restaurant in Manhattan, a swastika carved into the door of a synagogue in Salt Lake City, an episode in Los Angeles during which Jewish diners were attacked and pelted with bottles. Politicians have taken note. A day after members in the House asked President Biden to lead a united government effort to combat anti-Semitism rising in this country, he released this statement, and I quote, "We cannot allow the toxic combination of hatred, dangerous lies, and conspiracy theories to put our fellow Jewish Americans at risk. The Department of Justice," he said, "will be deploying all the tools at its disposal to combat hate crimes." Back to the Gaza conflict. Surprisingly, in my research, I don't troll white nationalists, but Nick Fuentes, who is a leading Stop the Steal election theft conspiracy theorist, delighted some of his extreme right followers with this tweet, and I quote, "Palestine is not the only country under Israeli occupation. Jews also control this government. As Israel and Gaza traded rockets across their borders," we'll get to the far left. It's a problem, but listen to the far right. "They seized on the conflict to foment anti-Semitism with memes about the number of President Joe Biden's appointees who are Jewish, and actual pictures online I saw of Jews emerging from underneath carpets, taking over America." This isn't about these white supremacists actually believing in Palestinians' right to dignity or a state of their own. It's using this conflict as tools to advance their anti-Semitism and their white supremacy. Between May 7th and May 14th last night, the ADL noted 17,000 users tweeted Hitler was right as hostilities between Israel and Hamas ramped up. There's another forum called 4chan. It cooked up a theory that Jews are retaliating against Bill Gates for past criticisms of Israel by breaking the news of his sexual misconduct. White nationalist groups also believe that Arab security in their own lands, think about this, will prevent the immigration of Muslims to the United States. A channel connected to the racist and anti-Semitic group Proud Boys juxtaposed pictures of Palestinians and the Charlottesville marchers and wrote that the events were part of one struggle. Now, let's go to the left, because reaction to this year's conflict in the Middle East has differed somewhat from the past, in that more Americans, mostly Democrats, have voiced criticism of Israel and expressed support for the Palestinian cause. In April, the Human Rights Watch group deemed Israel wrongly guilty of crimes of apartheid. You may have heard about that widely discussed report, and representatives like New York Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez lambasted Israel for its treatment of the Palestinians and pushed to condition military aid to Israel. And Republicans took the opportunity to accuse Democrats of failing to appreciate Israel's security needs and the scourge of anti-Semitism. Biden said yesterday the support is ironclad. Before I go to part two, Europe has also seen an upsurge of anti-Semitic incidents tied to last month's conflict, including the vandalism of synagogues, desecration of memorials to victims of the Holocaust. In Germany, the local Jewish community called on Berlin to step up protection of Jewish institutions throughout the country. after Israeli flags were burned in front of 2 synagogues, while in Austria, a non-Jewish woman was assaulted for reading a Jewish history book on the subway. Here's what's not different, part 2. I want to introduce a concept that many of you have studied at university. Professor at Berkeley, I forget his name, wrote a recent article, but it's not new. There are the Jews, like most of us attending tonight's TIU session. And then there are, in parentheses, the Jews. The Jews on this evening program are people who live next door. Or in Memphis, 99% of Memphis is Gentile. Jews are, the people you may know. Some are helpful, some are friendly, some are caricatured wrongly as wealthy or whatever the stereotype is. But the Jews, in parentheses, they live nowhere in particular. They're a creature of myth as part of a culture war, living in people's individual and collective minds. And the Jews of myth also carry a stigma. They work in a secret cabal. They serve their own interests at the expense of others. They are a successful conspiracy. So when real Jews are attacked, it's usually because the persecutors are aiming at those, quote, Jews of conspiratorial myth. I want to give you one example. A British neo-Nazi turned informer, Matt Collins, described his former buddies in a New Yorker profile in 2019, sitting in a pub in northern England, aiming, and I quote, to get pissed, make threats, blame the Jews, and go home. Blame which Jews? It must have been the mythic ones, because in Warrington, England, there are hardly any real Jews on the ground. So the hate group might not have even known any real ones. They were ready for action. The Jews is also a meme that has the ability to spread like a virus, to become highly visible, to serve as a target for a mood of grievance, hostility. It's a cultural phenomenon rather than a local reality. And it can leapfrog freely culturally from Christianity to Islam. We've seen it in history, to communism. It can hibernate for long periods. Once you've decided that an invisible hand is behind the world's problems, it's only a matter of time before you decide it belongs to an invisible Jew. Now, this is History 101, right? The blood libel. Until the last decades of the 20th century, Christian doctrine was an effective carrier of the Jews. Today, both left-wing and right-wing populism are ideal carriers. All varieties of demagoguery, totalitarian movements like fascism, authoritarianism. The Jews myth explains why, after so many centuries of false and destructive accusations, something as new and specific as QAnon still comes up immediately, of all things, with charges of Jews involved in child sex trafficking and using blood. Why the Jews? Because with them, you are free to choose any accusation. So just a few more sentences on this. In one sense, this conspiracy-inspired anti-Semitic idea suggests that what is abundant in the world is not a specific hatred of real Jews like you and me, but conspiracy-driven hatred in general, for which the Jews just happen to be a good target. But as we know, sooner or later, there's nothing funny about conspiracy theories. They end up resulting in actual violence and worse. How do you combat them? Tough to do. Does reasoning get the job done? This conspiracy-driven kind of hatred. And one of the reasons I'm having this program is many people have asked me, what about the epidemic of anti-Semitism? Fighting it with communal organization or money or government power, it does make us feel like we're doing something and there's some value to it. But it often is largely a waste of time. So tonight we're going to talk about, I can't wait to hear Rabbi Dreyfus's ideas and thinking on how to combat this. Some say the best way to combat anti-Semitism might be just to continue promoting enlightenment and facts. So take the non-Jewish woman of color, Donna Brazile, for instance, who wrote in the Wall Street Journal. She tried that approach. It's called the Pandemic of Anti-Semitism. You can look it up. She called hatred of the Jewish people only one expression of the virus of prejudice. I want to quote her. She writes, even our most brilliant scientists can't develop a vaccine for this disease. All of us, citizens and government officials, need to do our best to stamp it out. The perpetrators of vile anti-Semitic attacks in the US and elsewhere. And here Shelley Levy and others have asked me, what about criticism of Israel to those who aren't Jewish? It's one thing to malign Israel within the family. What about being critical of Israel with those who aren't Jewish? She says she's not Jewish. There's nothing anti-Semitic about policy disagreements with the government of Israel. Israeli Jews are sharply divided in their opinions of their own government, just as we Americans are sharply divided in our views of the US government. But attacking people because they are Jewish is not a policy dispute. It's about simple hatred. So those on the far left, she says the far right we know, but those on the far left who profess to champion Palestinian rights, which she believes in, are sorely misguided if they believe that they will aid Palestinians by condoning praise for Adolf Hitler or not speaking out against the beating up of Jews in New York and LA or defacing synagogues. Those on the far right who give a pass to neo-Nazi mass murderers, such as participants in the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, who marched with tiki torches while chanting Jews will not replace us, are motivated by the same fanatical anti-Semitism that motivated Hitler's Nazi followers. Ditto for the white supremacist gunman who murdered 11 congregants at a Pittsburgh synagogue, my friends, less than 3 years ago. He was motivated by a burning anti-Semitism that had nothing to do with Israel. Remember that. Upon entering the synagogue, he yelled, "All Jews must die," as he opened fire after posting anti-Semitic slurs about filthy, evil Jews on social media. And the synagogue shooting came 3 years after a white racist murdered 9 Black congregants, you'll remember, during Bible study at Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston. Both mass murderers were rooted in the same evil. I want to quote Brazile before I give you 7 brief responses, and I'll close my time and turn it over to Rabbi Dreyfus. Anti-Semitism, Brazile writes, this is a non-Jewish woman in the Wall Street Journal. Anti-Semitism is based on the same belief as racism and other forms of prejudice. The other is inferior and not entitled to the same human rights as a superior class or race. I love it when people who aren't Jewish own anti-Semitism. So what are some responses? Told you what's not different in terms of the Jews of the myth and the Jews we are. As we know, the big lie in Germany, only half of 1% of Germans were Jewish. And yet the Jews were responsible for Germany's misfortune. So what are our responses? Number 1, show Jewish pride. There is no time for American Jews to become, this is no time, the American Jewish Committee said this, for American Jews to become Marrano Jews. We can and should openly affirm our identity. We should celebrate our heritage. Our hashtag should be Jewish and proud. We should not remove mezuzahs from our doors or kippahs from our heads or the word Jewish from the facades of our institution or in any other way cover or hide under the bed. Show Jewish pride. That's one response. Two, embrace Israel and admit her flaws. Some Jews seem to believe that distancing, if not detaching from a link with Israel, will protect Jews, or at the very least, endear them to the anti-Israel, anti-Zionist mobs. We know that that doesn't happen. Israel's not a perfect country. It's okay, nor is any other country on earth, including the United States. But the story of Israel is awe-inspiring. It's a metaphor for the triumph of hope over despair. It's a democratic work in progress. It's a progressive beacon in a part of the world with too few counterparts. So embrace Israel and admit her flaws. Three, when it comes to anti-Semitism, and again, the American Jewish community has a great phrase, it's essential to be swivel-headed. This age-old pathology comes from multiple sources, but too many have insisted on a narrower vision, only calling out anti-Semitism when it serves their own partisan political preference. So Jews on the left point their finger at the far right, while Jews on the right point their finger at the far left, when the truth is they're both correct. The events in Charlottesville, Pittsburgh, Poway, not to mention the conspiracy theories peddled by QAnon, are stark reminders of the deadly menace from the far right. Meanwhile, the events of recent weeks from the streets of New York to LA demonstrates that not all threats to Jews today come from the far right. The same can be said for what Jewish and pro-Israel students are facing on some campuses, not all, but some, where again, the danger doesn't emanate from the far right. And then if you throw in the danger of the extreme Muslim right, as we've seen in both the UK and other parts of Europe, we have to have a 360-degree view. Next point, focus on young Jews. It's all the more important that our children and grandchildren are involved in this discussion and as prepared as possible for what they may face. Not easy. There is a powerful imbalance in the classroom between a hostile professor or teaching assistant on the one hand and a student who tries to push back on the other. If you try to challenge on most college campuses, a politically correct crowd could easily face you with social isolation or worse. And let me just say this, when it comes to affirming Zionism and pro-Israelism, it takes a lot of courage. I don't know if it's still hard to be Jewish or pro-Israel at schools with large Jewish population, like Rabbi Dreyfus's Washington University alma mater or Cornell University, where I attended. But if you're a Jewish pro-Israel student at a small liberal arts college, like Colby College in Maine, you're brave if you speak out for Israel today. And if we count on the younger generations to stand up and be heard, then we have to help prepare them for the various situations in which they find themselves. Plus, they do need to feel the support of family and Jewish institutions. What's happening is not just battles over a boycott, but a high stakes fight for the outlook of the next generation of American leaders. Many of our young people are understandably detached from Israel. We need them to become critical lovers, not uncritical lovers, not unloving critics, but critical lovers of Israel. I just have two more points and then I'll make it before 7:30. I'll stop if I don't. Next response, anti-Semitism is not just a Jewish problem. When Jews are targeted as Jews on the streets, in shops, at synagogues, the threat is most immediately, of course, directed at Jews. However, these also need to be seen as assaults on the fabric and fiber of America, of our democratic society. I think that's what Donna Brazile was hinting at. When any minority is threatened, our country as a whole is at risk. There are both real and potential allies out there who understand the stakes involved, just as there are such allies who recognize that Israel is a key American partner despite her flaws, sharing values and interests with our country, and messed up politically like our country is too. It would be short-sighted to try and portray, I think, I agree with this point of view, the current challenges that we face as Jews as if they were Jewish alone. They're not. And we shouldn't shortchange ourselves by thinking and acting as if they are. We need to engage partners. And a number of studies have shown that Jews are highly regarded among other American groups. So it's not as if we're suddenly alone, isolated, and friendless. The Jewish community has been a friend to other communities in America over years, decades, centuries, whether it's been the fight for civil rights or social justice or women's empowerment or overcoming unjust immigration restrictions or standing up for other targeted communities. True friendship must work both ways, all the more so in times of need. And I think Jews who are going at this alone and not looking for allies are making a mistake. Two more, learn some basic truths. Shelley Levy's point, what do I tell my friends who are not Jewish? The Middle East is an informational minefield with competing narratives, storylines in every direction, but none of that should obscure some basic facts. One, Jews are indigenous to the region, just as Arabs are. Two, the relationship between Jews and this part of the world dates back continuously more than 3,500 years. Israel's modern day birthright emanated from the Balfour Declaration, the League of Nations, the United Nations. How many nations on earth, including a number of Israel's neighbors, can claim so many layers of legitimacy? So we need to teach people some basic truths. Yes, the Palestinians deserve a state. They could have had one beginning in 47, 48. They need one, but they spurned opportunities. Hopefully it can happen in the future. Israel withdrew lock, stock, and bagel from Gaza in 2005. By 2007, Hamas, a terrorist organization by both the United States and European Union, seized power. Let me be clear, the Hamas charter explicitly calls for the destruction of the state of Israel. And here's the part that they don't tell you. The charter accuses Jews of fomenting the French Revolution, the First World War, and the Second World War. Hamas is funded and supplied by Iran, whose leadership calls openly for the annihilation of Israel. Gaza has borders with Israel and Egypt, not just Israel, as many allege. These are facts, basic facts we can teach people, not to be defensive, but just to share the facts. Israel is among the most multicultural, multiracial, multi-faith societies on the planet. Israel is a vibrant democracy. Israeli Arabs, who comprise approximately 21% of the population, can be found in the Supreme Court, in the Knesset, throughout Israeli society. I don't work for a right-wing Israel watchdog group. These are basic truths. And Israel has problems that need to be solved when it comes to the mistreatment of the Palestinians. Finally, and we're almost done, draw lessons from Jewish history. Anti-Semites, whether from the left or the right, they don't differentiate between good or bad Jews. To think that, like, they don't ask if you keep kosher or if you wear a head covering when you pray. So that's why I think there are responses to this we can take. It is now my pleasure. I'm glad he's going next because I can't wait to learn from someone who is closer to 30 than I, nearly double his age. Someone we take pride in here, a child of Memphis, of this congregation, ordained by the Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, our Rabbi, Jeff Dreyfus.
Good evening, everyone. It is such an honor and a pleasure to be with all of you. Thank you, Rabbi Greenstein, for such a kind introduction. It is so special for me to be sharing this virtual bima or conference room, whatever we're going to call it, with you tonight. And this is the first TIU event that I've led or been a part of in this capacity. And I'm so excited for this amazing conversation we're having tonight, and also for all the exciting learning that we have to come. I should begin by saying that when I decided to go to rabbinical school about 6 years ago, I didn't want to, and I didn't plan on spending a significant portion of my rabbinate on anti-Semitism. In fact, if you can remember back all the way to 6 years ago, you might remember that anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic attacks were not monthly or daily or weekly events. I guess I naively believe that we as a country were on our way past that. But those of you who have paid any attention to the news the last 5 years, or even heard what Rabbi Greenstein just said, know that we are in a much different place now than we were then. As Rabbi Greenstein said, anti-Semitic attacks in the last 6 years have increased astronomically. And unfortunately, I know that my rabbinate is unfortunately going to be filled with time, effort, and pain fighting anti-Semitism. I think it's fair to say that unfortunately in this generation, in my generation, and at least 1 or 2 or 3 more to follow, anti-Semitism is not going away. In a way, though, I think that my naivete says a lot about the last 50 years that we experienced in America. The last 50 years since World War II in the United States marked a total anomaly in Jewish history. There's no time in any country of size in the past 2,000 years since the Romans destroyed the temple 2,000 years ago in Jerusalem that the Jews have enjoyed a status like Jews in America have the last 50 years. There's a few small exceptions. Certain times in Italy, certain times in Amsterdam, certain times actually for much of the Jewish history of India. But by and large, American Jews in the last 50 years got really lucky. We grew up thinking that our neighbors and the people that we worked with and went to school with accepted us just like they did people of all other backgrounds or all other nationalities. Unfortunately, today, when we look at the news, when we turn on our social media, we see, especially these last few weeks with the conflict in Gaza and the rockets fired to Israel, we know that that's no longer the case. So I want to give a little bit more of a philosophical overview than what Rabbi Greenstein just shared. Though I want to share a framework that I first read about in this book, which I highly recommend if you're interested in the topic of anti-Semitism. It's called How to Fight Anti-Semitism by Barry Weiss, who was with the New York Times, now has left because she was, I'm not going to quite say canceled, but you should read her telling of what happened. She actually attributes a lot of what happened to her being in a way forced out of the New York Times to anti-Semitism itself, but anti-Semitism coming from the left, not the right. So a theory or a framework that she shares for thinking about anti-Semitism is one that was actually first articulated by the Jewish author Dara Horn. You might be familiar with some of her fiction. She's one of the most stunning Jewish authors today. If you like Jewish fiction, you have to read Dara Horn. She's incredible. She says that there's two different types of anti-Semitism. She calls it Purim anti-Semitism and Hanukkah anti-Semitism. So what happened on Purim? There was an evil man named Haman. And I know you're all muted, but you're all saying, boo. So there was this evil guy named Haman that wanted to destroy all of the Jews. And we make light out of it. We throw a carnival every year. We dress up in costume. But if you actually think about the story of Purim, it's really quite grotesque. The leader of Shushan wanted to exterminate all the Jews. And if we trace Purim anti-Semitism forward to today, it's easy to spot, right? The Nazis, Iran, as Rabbi Greenstein mentioned, the attacker that attacked the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Charlottesville, all of these people who want to destroy the Jewish people, the Jewish body, they fall into what Dara Horn calls the Purim anti-Semitism. On the other hand, she talks about Hanukkah anti-Semitism. So what happened in the story of Hanukkah? What did the Greek influenced Seleucids try to do? They didn't really, at least at first, try to destroy Jewish lives. They didn't try to exterminate us as a people. They tried to stop us from practicing Judaism. They tried to stop us from worshiping in the temple, from reading the Torah, from keeping our customs, from doing the things that made us Jewish. They didn't try to destroy the Jewish body. They tried to destroy the Jewish soul. They tried to destroy the things that made us Jewish. And what Dara Horn does and what Barry Weiss does beautifully in this book is say that, in fact, this kind of anti-Semitism isn't seen when we look at Iran or when we look at the Nazis. Unfortunately, it's seen a lot of times on the left. It's seen when forces on the left try to pressure Jewish people into being less Jewish. They try to point out things that are wrong with Judaism and try to persuade or pressure Jewish people from being less Jewish. Now, that is a big conversation, and I'm going to unpack that in a little bit. But first, I want to go back to what is happening on the right, because I think that both anti-Semitism on the right and on the left are quite pernicious. We should be afraid of both. And we should be afraid of both, though, for different reasons. I think that if you're on one side of the aisle politically, it's obviously easier to see the anti-Semitism in the side that's different than our own. The anti-Semitism on the right, though, is the one that I think by all accounts, whether you're on the right or the left, poses the biggest immediate threat to our physical security. The PhDs leading college campuses on the left are not, thankfully, trying to break into synagogues and kill Jewish people. Ku Klux Klan or white supremacists, people on the far right who say Jews will not replace us, they're the ones storming synagogues and threatening to actually harm Jewish people and kill Jewish people. That being said, there's another group who we also should be concerned about in terms of physical security. That is radical Islamic terrorists, who I'll talk about a little bit more in a second, but largely the animosity, as Rabbi Greenstein mentioned, that comes from radical Islam is somehow related to the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. So that one doesn't quite map as well onto the right-left framework, but those, and it's also not clear that that maps onto Purim anti-Semitism versus Hanukkah anti-Semitism. In a way, you can say that the conflict between radical Islamists and Jewish people is really more of a land conflict, a conflict over land, than a conflict over Jews existing. Now, that isn't always true. There's certainly plenty of people who want to do harm to Jews and probably still would even if Israel didn't exist. But I think speaking in generalities, it's fair to say that a lot of the time, radical Islam, the animosity towards Jews is related to the conflict and is a dispute over land. But so back to the kind of American context of Purim anti-Semitism versus Hanukkah anti-Semitism, the anti-Semitism that we face on the right is much easier to spot, right? It's easy to say this person threw a brick into a synagogue, defaced property, defaced cemeteries with swastikas or whatnot. That's easy to spot and easy to call out as anti-Semitism. On the left, it's a little harder to spot, but that doesn't mean it's any less dangerous, at least not in the long term. And why is that? It's because the anti-Semitism coming from the far left threatens the perception of the acceptability of being a Jew in America. So when I was actually, Rachel and I, my wife, were on our honeymoon during the conflict a few weeks ago with Hamas and Israel. And we would wake up and we would check our phones and we get on social media. First, I would check the Times of Israel usually, and I check in with friends who live in Israel and see how they're doing. But we would eventually at some point get on Instagram or Facebook, or Rachel got on TikTok. She loves TikTok. But we would unfortunately inevitably see people that we know to be progressive, to care about social justice, coming out with memes or with incendiary language that essentially equated the Jewish people to the aggressors, Israel to be the aggressors, Hamas to be liberators, and the Palestinian people that live in Gaza to be oppressed, and not oppressed by Hamas, but oppressed by Israel and the Jews. And the problem is, as I see it, that it's great, I think, as Temple Israel, as Jews who care about making the world a better place, we all, I don't want to speak for all of us, but I'll just say, as one of the rabbis at Temple Israel, if I can encourage the students that I'm teaching to want to make the world a better place and to want to litaken et ha'olam, to repair the world, then I think we're doing a good job. The problem is that for many people on the far left, and now increasingly more and more closer to the mainstream left, the desire to want to protect the oppressed, to lift up the fallen, if you will, extends only to the border of the Jewish people. That if we're progressive, then we should care about helping the underdog unless that underdog is Jewish. And for Jews who want to be a part of those spaces, for Jews who want to be allies with Black Lives Matter, with Pride, with all of these different progressive causes, they're oftentimes asked to check their Judaism at the door, because their Judaism is conflated by many on the left with support for Israel. I want to be clear for a moment that I think it is possible to be critical of Israel, as Rabbi Greenstein said, without being anti-Semitic. As a movement, Reform Jews are often critical of Israel for its treatment of religious pluralism, for its treatment of Arabs. We have a religious action center in America that works to advance progressive causes in America. Not necessarily just politically progressive, but progressive causes that we find speaking to us from our text, from our tradition. In Israel, in fact, the Reform movement has an Israeli Reform Action Center that works to advance the causes of the downtrodden and the oppressed in Israel. The Reform movement in Israel is often quite critical of the Israeli government. That doesn't make them anti-Semitic. The problem, I believe, coming from the left, is that if you show up as a Jew, and many people coming to Pride, coming to Black Lives Matter marches, find the inspiration to be allies in those causes in their Judaism. Many of them come draped in flags, bearing a Jewish star, wearing a talit, bringing quotes, bringing verses from the Torah in support of why they believe that those causes matter. And yet, when they reach the doors of or the entrance to the march, they're turned away. They're turned away because the left, or the far left, we can nitpick about how far this has creeped to the center of the left, but the left views any association with Israel as colonialist, as supporting apartheid, as being not the oppressed as Jews historically saw themselves, and still are to some extent today, but as the oppressor. And so those people on the left want us, in a Hanukkah sense, in the sense of the Seleucids from 2,000 years ago, want us to diminish our Judaism, want us to abandon our Judaism if we want a seat at the table in these progressive causes. So that both the right and the left pose tremendous challenge to Jews in America today. And I think that, as Rabbi Greenstein laid out, there are many potential solutions, but the scope of the challenge is so big that obviously, of course, there's no panacea. And in fact, even if we are incredibly successful at fighting anti-Semitism, in all likelihood, there's always going to be anti-Semitism. We're never going to be quite clear of it. Rabbi Greenstein, I see you. Do you want to jump in?
Oh, no, I'm waiting at the end.
Okay, sure. So I want to share just a couple of pieces of advice for how to fight anti-Semitism. But really quickly, I do, as someone a little bit closer to 30, I'm a little bit over the hump of 30, but certainly closer to college than Rabbi Greenstein. I do want to share a little bit about my experience on campus and what I believe to be the tenor of how Jewish life on campus is portrayed by people at APAC, for instance, or in kind of mainstream Jewish institutions. My experience going to APAC conferences, which I think serve a very important function and purpose, but my experience has been a lot of the sky is falling, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. That it is totally unsafe, not just in the kind of new version of what safety means, meaning that words are violence, which is an interesting definition of safety, but in the traditional definition of physical safety, many in our mainstream Jewish institutions claim that it is unsafe to be a Jew on a college campus today. I would say that in almost all cases, in my experience and with people I've talked to, that is just simply not true. We still live in the United States of America, the country that has been more accepting of not only Jews, but any and all minority groups and immigrant groups in the history of the world, and that's assimilated and got along or fostered a sense of togetherness and integration more than any country in the history of the world. For example, if we stop thinking about how unwelcoming we are to immigrants for a moment and just compare ourselves to the other enlightened nations of Europe, if you look at how poorly they have integrated their immigrants over the past 2 decades, many of whom come from the Islamic world, and you compare that to how we have assimilated and integrated immigrants for the entire history of our country, we'll see that actually America is a wonderfully and really miraculously accepting place. So college campuses still reflect that. It is still quite safe to be a Jew in America. The issue is, and I think Rabbi Greenstein put this very well, is that it's getting more and more difficult to be a Zionist and to outwardly be a Zionist. And I think that the reason is because that a very small minority of students, pro-BDS students, has in a sense taken leadership positions in student bodies. They have a very organized and well thought out strategy for doing this. I'm happy to point people to podcasts or articles that kind of outline this concerted effort on the part of pro-Palestinian groups to gain influence or exert influence over not just progressive groups on campus, but all student government. And those groups have been increasingly, if not entirely, unwelcoming of Jewish voices, no matter what those voices are, because they're associated with Israel, except for the kind of Jewish voice for peace, which is anti-Zionist. So those groups will allow the Jewish voice for peace into their college group because they're the kind of the token Jewish anti-Zionist. I do want to say the Jewish voice for peace really has hijacked the sensible position. All Jews should be for peace and are for peace. So when I, a minute ago, argue against the group named Jewish Voice for Peace, I'm not in any way arguing against peace. I just think that the group that has that name is not entire. Their name doesn't quite convey their mission or their goals. So I do just in a word of wrapping up, I think that the sense of gloom and doom that many of us in the community have for what Jewish life on campus is quite a bit overdone. Which is a good thing. The thing that I want to emphasize, and if you're interested in solutions, here's a whole book, How to Fight Anti-Semitism. So I'm not going to convey all of them, but I do want to lean into one, and that is to embrace your Judaism. If we want to stymie the efforts of people who want Judaism to fade into the dust, who not only want to destroy the Jewish body, but want to destroy the Jewish soul, what is the best way to do that? The best way to do that is to embrace our Judaism. It's to find meaning in our Judaism. It's to show our children, it's to show each other that Jewish life has meaning, that Jewish life, that Judaism, our 2,000-year-old tradition, has something special and unique to bring to the world, and that it allows us to find holiness and to connect to something greater than ourselves and to connect to each other. And that is something worth perpetuating. It's something worth fighting for. And it's something worth putting in a little bit of extra effort each week, whether that's lighting the Shabbat candles, whether it's studying a little bit of Torah, whether it's engaging in Jewish culture, like reading a Dara Horn book. Every time that we do that, we bring a little bit of light into the world. And we say to those who want to destroy us, not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Rabbi Greenstein?
Thank you so much, Rabbi Dreyfus. So well presented. We're going to have open mic with Zoom only people in 5 minutes. I just want to close with one thought, another big idea related to COVID. Anti-Semitism is a virus that attacks weak bodies. And by no means is there one factor driving rising anti-Semitism in this country. Barry Weiss's book suggests the left-right problem. That's part of it. It's not a black-white problem. It's a societal problem that needs broad-based solutions. And Carly Pildes writes extensively about this. We are living in a time of terrible political instability, in a time of rapid spreading and mainstreaming of conspiracy theories, we're living in a time of economic frustration and anxiety. This is not a rant. It's just a fact that the gap between rich and poor is widening, and the American middle class struggles to hold on. 50% of Americans believe at least one conspiracy theory today. 50%. 40% of Americans could not handle a $400 emergency expense right now. So I think we need to widen the lens and look at society and not make this just a left-right issue. Americans are losing hope in the American dream. They're maybe not you or I, but many Americans are losing hope that their children will be better off than they were. This is fertile ground for anti-Semitism. Any conspiracy, it's fertile ground for any conspiracy to take hold. Our democracy is weakened, and anti-Semitism is a virus that attacks weak bodies. We've seen through history, it's an opportunistic infection. So I'm looking at some of my mentors who knew someone named Al Vorspan of blessed memory, one of the great social justice, who actually, Rabbi, founded the Religious Action Center that you mentioned. And he said 60 years ago that we have to acknowledge the conditions in which anti-Semitism flourishes. What did he say the conditions were? Instability, hopelessness, conspiracy. He said this. He said we have to fight them all vigorously. And it's a threat not just to our community, it's a threat to all people who are minorities. So that's why we have to mobilize to fight rising anti-Semitism and build a more just America together. And thank you all so much for joining us. Of course, Joseph Telushkin, Dennis Prager, Why the Jews? There's so many books to read on the longest running hatred. To end on a good note, anti-Semitism, Jew hatred was the fatal flaw in Christianity's long and noble attempt to serve God. And what the Catholic Church has done since Nostra Aetate, what virtually all the mainline churches have done in their teshuvah and asking forgiveness, that it's not about the supersession of the Jews by Christians, but it's the survival of Jews and Judaism that Rabbi Dreyfus has laid out through the lens of Hanukkah and Purim, joyous holidays, despite the enemies. So we're all in this together. It's 7:57. Those of you on Facebook, I'm sorry you didn't join us on Zoom. We're gonna have a discussion now. So Jay Cohen, thank you for being our moderator. We now wanna have open mic and listen to any of you 46 with us. Good night, everyone who's watching on Facebook. Zoom, stay with us. It's time for our discussion.
If you're, I was going to say before we got off that if people were on Facebook, they certainly know how to join us for the discussion. I see one person just did. Maybe we'll have a couple others join.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Sure.
That's helpful. Okay. Anyone want to unmute and share alternative views or, oh, Sally, your hand is up.
Okay.
Or maybe Barbara, I see two of you.
Listen, so I have a question. I think it's interesting when I look at just anti-whoever over the millennia, that Jews are at the same time subhuman and also superhuman. So they're less than human, and they control the world. Can you think of any other people with prejudice like this? And how do you combat something that is at both ends of a spectrum? So that's my question. And also, I just want to say that, Jews in Spain had it pretty good, and 50 years is not so long. And that the Talmud said that love without criticism isn't real love. So thank you for that. Okay, so I'm going to mute.
I think you point to the paradox in trying to give a simplistic answer to the reasons for anti-Semitism, whether they're economic, political, social, religious. Think of what Hitler convinced the German people, that Jews are Untermenschen, right? That they're subhuman. And yet, Telushkin and Prager argue, if you look at history, that it's been it's like, okay, we have to tell a joke. The rabbi goes to visit Mrs. Stein, who because she's depressed, and the rabbi's been told that she needs to be lifted out of her funk. So the rabbi goes into Mrs. Stein's apartment and notices that on her nightstand are all these anti-Semitic tracts that Jews are taking over the world, Jews are superhuman, Jews are superior, Jews are running the banks and the media. And the rabbi says, Mrs. Stein, I think I know what your problem is. She says, what? She said, all those anti-Semitic that Jews are taking. She says, no, those make me feel better, actually. So there you have it. That I'm not a professor of history to know whether there are others, but you've pointed to something that not only do you get it from both directions politically, but you get it from the whole theory that Jews were like vermin, Jews are a race. You know, Wilhelm Marr, the whole word anti-Semitism was coined in the 1870s. Jews were, Jew hatred goes back in time. So was it jealousy in some societies? The story of Albert Einstein being kicked off the University of Berlin faculty, one of the last, I don't know if it's apocryphal, but they said, now, Herr Einstein, aren't you ashamed you were born a Jew? You Untermenschen, you subhuman person. And Einstein, before he left Germany, got up at the faculty meeting and said, you're right. I am ashamed I was born a Jew. I wish I had come to Judaism not by the accident of birth, but after ascertaining its worth. So you have this play between Jews as being more and Jews being less. I don't know. Maybe Rabbi Dreyfus knows more about other parallels among other peoples. I don't know, but it's clearly true.
I think that was a wonderful answer. And the only thing I want to add is, Sally, to your wonderful question, that it's impossible to give a rational explanation to how Jews can at the same time be subhuman and also controlling the world, right? And so I think that speaks to the fact that Jew hatred is not rational. It doesn't come from a place of reason. There's no rationale why people throughout the last 2,000 years have always hated Jews. And unfortunately, that's what makes responding to anti-Semitism so challenging. If there were a rational reason, we could present our evidence clearly, we could win in the court of public opinion, and there'd be no Jew hatred. But unfortunately, it's not rational, and that's why it's so challenging. Great, wonderful question.
Linda, yeah, well said, Rabbi. Linda.
My question is much less sophisticated or complex than Sally's. And so I'll tell you my experience and then I'll ask my question. Many years ago, when I had a lot more hair than I've got now, I found myself living in College Station, Texas, which was an absolute awful place to live, and working at the university there, Texas A&M. And I had on multiple occasions, people say to me, I was very proud of my Judaism, and there really weren't any other Jewish people around that I knew on the campus. They said to me, where do you put your horns at night when you go to bed? And so my question is that anti-Semitism or just plain ignorance or both? And I'm sure other people that are listening to this may have had the same conversation with people before, but this happened to me multiple times in that 1.5 terrible years that I lived there.
Well, obviously there's a spectrum. I was pulled over by an Arkansas state trooper, was written up, who had never met a Jew before, and I thought I was going to die. It ended up being an ignorant story, not a, actually, he said, "Where are you going, ribeye?" Never met a Jew before with a gun. You know, I saw it in the holster there, and I said, "I'm going to Jonesboro, Arkansas." He said, "Why are you going there, ribeye?" And I said, "I'm going for Yom Kippur." And I'm thinking in my head, oh my God, this guy's never met a Jew. And I just threw out some Hebrew. So I said, it's like Christmas. I'm sorry, officer, it's great. He said, "Hey, wait a minute. Didn't Sandy Koufax not pitch a ball game on one of those Jew holidays?" I'm like, tonight. So Sandy Koufax saved my life. I'm also humbled by my teachers in this congregation, including Professor Abe Kriegel of blessed memory. And I saw Riva's name pass by, and he wrote an exceptional article I urge you to look up in the Virginia Quarterly, I forget the year, about when he and Riva were driving to a bar mitzvah in the Delta. And this was when Mississippi was burning and the Klan was out. And Riva can correct me. It's been a while since I read the article, maybe decades. But they had a station wagon. I guess Riva baked a challah, or they brought a challah down, and they had to get gas. And literally this guy had a redneck with a pickup truck. There was a honky tonk, a gun rack. And one of them, I don't want to, again, I'm just paraphrasing the story, that Abe tells masterfully. One of them is wearing a Jewish star. And the guy looks in and sees them. And the Kriegels think it could be over. He's circling the car. And Professor Kriegel says, we just want to go, sir. You know, what is it? He gave him like whatever the money was for the gas. And the guy says some words to the effect of, pardon my French, "That's the biggest damn challah I've ever seen." So I'm not trying to make us feel better. I know we could tell our Jews and horn stories, but there are some other ones. That's all I want to say. And maybe Rabbi and others. I see Russell has his hand up.
Yes, I think we've been very fortunate in Memphis because this has not been a hotbed of overt anti-Semitism. I'm not sure that it's because people are any better here. I think with some people, there is a limit to how many people they can hate. Unfortunately, that's not true of everybody, but I think with some people there is, and they have a much larger minority they can hate. And this is the reason why some of them don't vent more hostility toward us.
Let's go to more questions or comments, Rabbi, or others have questions or comments. I mean, that's true. I mean, we live in a philo-Semitic environment. You know, whenever like rabbis speak at churches and they apologize at the question and answer session, "Excuse me, Rabbi, I'm a Gentile," before I ask this question. And I'm thinking to myself, they're apologizing that they divided the world into Jews and Gentiles in the Bible Belt, right? Like, okay, we'll take your question now. Sorry. But it's true. Others and Rabbi, any other comments? And oh, I see Ida. Ida has her hand up. Go.
Hi, Rabbi. Hi, Lenore. She's on there. Rabbi, I have a real concern. I've been wanting to speak with you. You know, I've been really involved with the Holocaust Museum and Holocaust education, but I've been looking for studies that show that Holocaust education has reduced anti-Semitism, and it seems the opposite. With the increase of Holocaust education, we've also had an increase in anti-Semitism.
I've read such studies, and I want to defer to an expert. Ida is the Florida equivalent of Rachel Shankman. Let me explain. That's the highest compliment. Rachel Shankman is the director of Facing History and Ourselves, which isn't just about the Holocaust, but it's about facing history and ourselves and learning from history. So I think there's data that shows both ways. I mean, if you take that point, then we should reduce Holocaust education because it increases anti-Semitism, going to Rabbi Dreyfus's point. So I've heard of those studies, but I would defer to Facing History and Ourselves, A World of Difference, the Holocaust education programs, which I believe beg to differ with that assertion. Rabbi, do you have anything to share with Ida?
Well, I see Rachel Shankman is on and
Oh my gosh, she's here. Rachel, how do you respond to Ida?
Thank you.
Memphis meets Florida.
Oh, thank you so very much for the opportunity. Actually, we have a great many studies that point to students being able to be much more empathetic, much less anti-Semitic, much less racist when they study the events that led to the Holocaust. It's not so much just the empathy for people who were victims, but understanding human behavior and understanding how neighbors turn to neighbor, or how neighbors turn against neighbors. So I think we have quite a bit of evidence. It doesn't mean that intellectuals per se are any less inclined to be anti-Semitic. The example, perhaps the most cogent example, is of the people who designed the final solution, the people who sat around the conference table at the Wannsee Center. The majority of them had PhDs. So I would say education per se, without a moral center, doesn't inoculate people from being anti-Semitic. But I would say that certainly our values and how we try to teach about the events that led to the Holocaust are a critical part of creating a more humane society. So that's what I would say.
Thank you so much for that, Rachel,
So
and for all you do.
thank you.
And Ida, thank you for the question so that we could have this exchange. Others, please, it's been such a stimulating discussion. Well, we're not going anywhere, but you hopefully will enjoy dessert, tea, coffee. Oh, Sally, one more, go.
I do, because, I've had a lot of teens call me about this issue and what to do about people who equate Jews in the diaspora to Israeli decisions, who don't understand the definition of Zionism, who equate it with racism. And for those of us in the diaspora who just think it's okay to have one place to be on earth, and how do we respond to that? And how do we talk to those kids?
That's, Sally, the question of our day, and the question that so many of our kids, so many, not only kids, but people in their 20s and their 30s and their 40s that grew up, and of course before, but that grew up with the, I would say, a little bit uncritical position on Israel in the Jewish institutions that we grew up with, and now are coming to understand that the situation in Israel and with the Palestinians is more complicated than we maybe understood when we were children. And I don't say that faulting anybody, because educating about a very complex geopolitical problem on the other side of the world is not an easy thing to do in any situation. But when we are confronted with the fact that actually Israel perhaps can do some bad things, and yet we have a connection to the one country, as you said, Sally, in the world where Jews can be a free people, Lihiyot am chofshi be'artzenu, can be a free people in our own land, can escape the 2,000 years of oppression and anti-Semitism that we face throughout our history. When we're confronted with the fact that Israel can do wrong, and yet we have this attachment, or we think that we should have this attachment to a place that means so much to us as a people, or we think as Jews should be a central part of our identity. And yet we don't have a PhD in geopolitics. It is a very, very difficult conversation to have. And so what I would say, what I would say, first of all, is we have to strive for nuance. We're never going to win a conversation that takes place via memes on Facebook or Instagram. And I do think we should be better as a community at social media, at, I don't want to say fighting back, but at actually telling our story. Because I think that if people that criticize Israel knew that Israel is a safe haven for Jews, not just Ashkenazi Jews escaping the Holocaust, but for Jews that were kicked out of Middle Eastern countries and doubled the size of Israel when they fled, for Jews from Ethiopia or from Russia, that if you say, I care about people who are being oppressed and I care about refugees, and therefore I support the Palestinians, well, how then can you not support Israel? Because that is the entire raison d'etre of the state of Israel. And so I think that if we can do one thing to help other people understand why Israel has a right to exist, it's that showing that, in fact, supporting Israel is a progressive cause, and that for the very same reasons that and I'm going to say, I'm not going to put anybody else on this, but say for myself, for the same reasons I support Israel's right to exist, I also support the right of Palestinians to live in a land of their own and safely. And I think that is the position that we should strive to convey.
Thank you. Does anyone have another comment? We're again open. Yes, Russell?
Yes, we've talked about these various groups that seem to promote anti-Semitism. And there are groups in our society that are trying hard to do the opposite. Many years ago, I spent 2 years teaching in the Catholic parochial schools. And in recent decades, the Catholic Church in general, and many of the Catholics in particular, have fought very hard to try to understand Jews and to get along with Jews. And I believe we should commend those that are trying to do that.
Not only that, it's a strong point. We need more inclusive de-escalation efforts, meaning inclusive education that not only applauds the church, but points out that the only way we will end racism in this country when it comes to African is for white people to speak up. The only way we'll end rape generally is not for women to speak up, but for men to speak up. And the Catholic Church has been a beacon of not just religious reconciliation, but to borrow the name of the organization Rachel has led, a beacon of facing history in ourselves. And yeah, you're absolutely right. And we need to raise up those examples. The Southern Poverty Law Center, which isn't even a religious organization, and others like it. I'm not promoting, just seconding your point. And I'm glad you saw it as a teacher in the Catholic schools. That's great. Carol is an art teacher in Episcopal school. The Episcopal Church has similarly come out with very strong denunciations of any anti-Semitism from a religious lens, not a political lens. And anyone else? Oh, please, Ida. And yes, Ida and Linda.
I hate to sound negative about the Holocaust education.
You
but
didn't.
I just want to give an example. We have all these Holocaust museums. I've talked to people who've gone, and for some people it's life-changing, and other people like, I'm really tired of every city I go to having a Holocaust memorial or a Holocaust museum.
Right.
Where's the museum for my people? Where's the museum for the Native Americans whose land we're on, whose land we've stolen? Where is that museum? So I just want to give an example. In Winnipeg, they were going to build, you know about this,
Washington,
Rabbi,
D.C.
another Holocaust museum, but they ended up building, the government said no, and it became the Winnipeg Museum, Canadian Museum of Human Rights. And it starts with they call the Native, it's not Native Americans, Indigenous peoples, the First Nation. And it starts with the things that happen to the First Nation too. So everyone who enters knows about different things that happen to different groups. And it includes Jews in the Holocaust, but it gives people a greater understanding of, it's not a contest of who had the worst things happen to them.
I know that that's the perception. I'm not sure that the memorials are a game of victimization, that my pain is greater than your pain. I'll tell you a true story that happened yesterday to me. Many of you know in Memphis, the Weinriches, Sam and Frida Weinrich. He's 101 years old. He'll be 102 this September. He and his wife met in Landsberg, Germany in a detention camp. They went back last year. They had an anniversary at Auschwitz of the survivors. They're the only couple. Ronald Lauder flew them all back to Auschwitz. They're the only married couple left in the world who survived Auschwitz together. I think that when you look at people, and I'm sure in your community, people like Paula Kelman of blessed memory, Nina Katz of blessed memory, by telling their story of survival, I keep it on my desk. Paula wrote, "Do not hate anyone." I think it's because it's within many of our lifetimes, and it's still so raw and real. Even as survivors are dying off, we still have, thank God, a few still with us. So yes, there doesn't need to be perhaps another Holocaust museum in Minnetonka, if there's one in Minneapolis and one in St. Paul. And Jewish academics have written about that. But it's not always a mutually exclusive discussion. Some of the most empathetic, compassionate teachers of tolerance, of whether it's Native American, not even tolerance, embracing differences, whether it's LGBTQ or color or creed, have been Holocaust survivors. So that would be my response to your point. And Linda, you had one, and I want to respect your time. I know many of you need to go by 8:30, but thank you, Ida. Thank you for that. Linda.
I just wanted to add something to what Russell was saying about Memphis, that we've kind of been lucky in a certain way with regard to anti-Semitism. And I thought for a lot of years, there's been a lot of work done through Temple. Temple is the congregation I know the most, to foster relationships with our Christian neighbors. And we have churches that come in and they see our services, and they come on Friday nights, they always have. And then Rabbi Micah's working with the Ministerial Society, Association for quite a while, and all of these other kind of things. I think it has helped a lot of people to know us much better, and to recognize that we're just people just like they are. And when they come into our service, they leave and want to come back. And the other thing is, talking about the Holocaust, also, I think the Holocaust survivors that we've had in Memphis have been pretty outgoing about going to the schools and teaching the kids about what the Holocaust was like, and how they got out of that and came to the United States, and where they were welcomed with open arms and this sort of thing. And it really has helped our students. And this may have happened all over the country. All I know is Memphis, but it really has helped our young people to learn what the Holocaust is all about, and to have more empathy than they would have had otherwise.
I'm going to let Rabbi Dreyfus have the last word. Hi, Mom. I never want to cut you off, but I just want to share one point before my mother has the penultimate word, and then Rabbi Dreyfus the last word.
Penultimate.
I'm very proud of where I serve, but I am humbled by giants like Nina, who grew up at an Orthodox shul. And also, I just want to recall someone you knew better than I, Linda, who I wish I had known personally, Rabbi Ari Becker of blessed memory. Rabbi Wax was a civil rights icon in this city. But when Rabbi Becker's son, Danny, Rabbi Becker, Ida, gets to your point. He was an immigrant. He survived Nazi Germany. He had an accent, apparently. Others here knew him. He marched in Selma. He wasn't Abraham Joshua Heschel. He wasn't in the movie. He went down to Selma, and when he came back, I asked his son about it, and he caught holy hell from some people, because while people from Chicago and New York came down here with the freedom rides, they went back to Chicago and Boston, and people here had to still make a living, and it was hard. And you know, when you stuck your neck out. So someone said to Rabbi Becker, you know, look, we all believe in these rights, but this is really causing a problem. And I'm told, and I'm sure it's true, that Rabbi Becker in his accent said, after what I saw and after what our people went through in Nazi Germany, where else should a Jew be but in the front line in Selma? I think that closes the circle of your point, Ida. And Linda, thank you for reminding me of that story of another giant, Rabbi Becker. Mom, and then Rabbi Dreyfus.
Yeah, I just wanted to say two things. Number one, many of you may know, I've lived in Naples, Florida for the last 23 years. My late husband was a pioneer in terms of interfaith and interracial justice. He started Catholic Jewish Dialogue. You talk about inclusivity, and Micah will be speaking at our Kristallnacht service in November, and hopefully it'll be live, and hopefully we'll be able to stream it or at least record it so that your congregants can hear it. Second thing is that Ida, I am so thrilled that she has become part of this discussion. She has been a leader in Holocaust education in Naples. Ida, you are irreplaceable and you don't give yourself enough credit. So I want to say how thrilled I am that she was part of this discussion, that I was here to hear my Beni, my son, who I'm so proud of. Thank you.
And I just want to say, Ida's community, maybe we can model that here in Memphis. This event I'm speaking at is taking place in a Catholic church.
Exactly.
It's not taking place in a synagogue or the JCC. It's in a church.
It's in
which to me gives me chills.
It's unbelievable when your dad.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to belabor it. I know we got in by 8:30. So yeah. I want to give my colleague the last word, but thank you.
I would just want to end with a word of thanks. Thank you to Rabbi Greenstein for convening this. I know so many in our community, this topic is unfortunately never far from our minds. And so thank you for convening this discussion. Thank you for all of you for adding your voice, for adding your perspective, for sharing what it's like to grow up in this place, to be in this place, to live in this time, and to be proud Jews and share what the great things and also sometimes the hard things that entails. I want to end with just touching on Linda's last question. That is, what has the outreach, perhaps the outreach that our community has done for generations has somehow lessened the hate. And I think that is just, you put your finger on the answer to this question, how to fight anti-Semitism. In Israel, for example, there are so many groups that we don't see on social media. We don't see all of the hundreds of thousands of people who work every day to build, not to fight, but to build relationships between Jews and Arabs. We don't see the memes about Rabbi Greenstein going and speaking at so many churches. We don't see the memes of the Kristallnacht program that's going to happen at a Catholic church. The reason why, the way that we can fight anti-Semitism is by getting out and meeting people and forming relationships, because it is so hard. It's actually impossible when you are standing face to face with another person and you see their humanity up close. It's impossible to hate them. And so if anything is going to give us hope, it is that. Thank you all for being here.
Take care, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, everyone. This has been great.
This is terrific. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.